This exam consists of 50 multiple choice questions. You will be given 45 minutes to complete the exam and will receive a warning when there are 5 minutes remaining. Be sure to use a number 2 pencil and make your marks heavy and dark. Now, if you're anything like me, those words make you just a little bit nervous. We've all been a bit traumatized by the standardized tests we had to take in school, but as it turns out, the harms of these exams go way beyond just making your hand shake a little when filling in a multiple choice bubble. State governments overregulate K-12 education in many ways, and standardized testing is one of the biggest culprits. Now, keep in mind as we go forward that we're going to be talking about subject exams that you would take during the school day, not anything like the ACT or SAT. As a child of public educators, I have seen firsthand the harms that these tests bring to our education system, and I know that many of you have as well. So, first, we'll take a look at the intense pressure that standardized testing in its current state puts on teachers. Then, we'll learn about the unfair situation it presents to students, before finally seeing how these tests pervert our concept of education as a whole. Now, there are 2 primary ways that standardized testing puts intense pressure on teachers: forcing them to teach to the test and having the results of those tests play a significant role in teacher evaluations. To understand the harms of teaching to the test, we have to understand that with standardized testing comes standardized teaching. In Tennessee, every single lesson taught in a public school classroom has to match up with the standard laid out by the state that will supposedly be covered on an end-of-course exam. And these lists of standards can be incredibly dense and even demeaning at points. For English and language arts alone, that document is 88 pages long, with 13 of these pages being a glossary, defining English vocabulary words for English teachers. The contents of these 88 pages strictly define what can and cannot be taught in an English classroom, eliminating a teacher's ability to create a fully well-rounded curriculum for their students. According to Laura Anziano, a 5th grade teacher in Tennessee, one of the challenges is the choice of curriculum. In Tennessee, school districts are required to choose from curriculums that have been vetted and approved by the state. Districts then require their teachers to teach these curriculums with fidelity, thereby removing the option for creativity and choice. But even if these standardized tests were fair for teachers to model their content around, they put an unfair and unfounded pressure on teachers to get their students to actually perform well. This pressure comes from the fact that standardized test scores often play a significant role in teacher evaluations, essentially what determines if someone is a good or a bad teacher, and can even determine what a teacher gets paid. In Tennessee alone, nearly 30% of school districts use teacher performance as a means of differentiating pay. But according to a study published in 2021 by Brown University, test scores can be predicted using factors that are largely outside of teacher control, and that linking these test scores to teacher evaluations did not impact those scores. A 2017 study published by the University of Maryland furthered this knowledge, as it found that instructional quality actually decreased with the rise of standardized testing, even in districts where overall educational quality was high. Teachers are being harmed by the overregulation of standardized testing because they are being forced to shift their focus from what they know will truly benefit their students to what may increase their test scores, even when these 2 things do not correlate. But as we all know, it's not just the students who are affected by this. It's also it's not just the teachers who are affected, it's also the students who have to take them. There are inherent cultural biases in how tests are created, only helping those who are in a majority population. According to a study by the University of Southern California, standardized testing scores questions are often normed to the knowledge of the majority, and that majority is often just students from more affluent backgrounds. These factors are often found in simple socioeconomic and ethnic differences, furthering the divides that education is meant to heal. But even if we think about this in a strictly geographic sense, a test that is created in California and then administered to a student in Memphis, a student in Franklin, and a student in Etowah will have inherent cultural lacks of understanding that will not be able to account for these students' differences, even if they are all equally intelligent and equally capable of scoring well. Students are feeling the harms of standardized testing because they are being graded on their backgrounds and not their actual knowledge of the subject. But if standardized testing right now is so bad, you may ask, what's the alternative? Why are we still doing it this way and no other way? And that brings us to our final point today, the purpose of education. In our modern world, we no longer need to be held back by this idea that standards and rote memorization of content are going to be what helps students succeed after high school. In the words of Denny Collins, the supervisor of data and assessment for Bradley County Schools in Tennessee, the model of testing students is antiquated, in the sense that we are no longer in a post-industrial revolution era intent on creating factory workers. Rather than testing, why not have students solve problems, learn to think critically on things that matter? Instead, we play to the lowest common denominator and say all kids must know X, Y, Z, which ironically can now be found in a matter of seconds on a cell phone. We can see here that even those who are on the ground running testing understand that it is unfair for the intrinsic value of education. As to why we're just still doing it this way, the answer is surprisingly simple: capitalism. According to Forbes, the legislation that created the rise in standardized testing was, quote, hatched by economists, bureaucrats, and politicians, end quote. Essentially what this means is that although there are many good and well-meaning people trying to create reasonable standards, those at the very top have never been meaningfully affected by them and only stand to gain from them succeeding. There are 4 main companies that create and grade these tests, essentially creating a monopoly around a multi-billion-dollar industry. The Washington Post reported that an analysis done on these 4 companies discovered that they make a combined profit of $2 billion every year, and that they spent over $20 million in political lobbying over a 5-year span. There is overregulation done by the state, because the state has lost sight of the fact that education should not be about pandering to corporations, but should be about teaching students to problem solve and think critically in an ever-changing world. So today, we've discovered the truth of overregulation through 3 lenses: the intense pressure that it puts on teachers, the unfair situation it presents to students, and the warped perception of education it implements on the entire system. While some may argue that having a standardized measure by which to grade these students outweighs any of the harms, the vast majority of research shows that this is simply untrue. The way to remedy this is to put the power back in the shaky hands of those who are filling in multiple choice bubbles, and return a voice to those who are telling us to make our marks heavy and dark. Let standards and standardized tests be made by those who will be affected by them. As it stands now, though, this is not what is happening. The state has an intense need to quantify success, corporations have an intense need to make a profit, and our education systems are suffering because of it.